Oh, hello there, and welcome to Phil Talking D20. So today's video is continuing our DM/GM 101 series, and it's a look at the Games Master's Toolbox. And what I mean by that is the tools that we need to be making our lives easier as a Games Master. These won't make you a better Games Master by themselves, but in combination and with the proper usage, they will certainly make your life a lot easier. So we're going to do a kind of a rundown on what I would consider like absolute essentials. And then we're going to look at bonus items to kind of get I suppose, an extra edge to our game. And to also help us out in the heat of the moment when we're actually at the table GMing kind of live. Because one of the universal truths of GMing is what's going to happen is something you don't expect. So, I mean, you can't prep, plan, or ready yourself to be prepared for the unexpected, because it's unexpected. But there are things that can help kind of ease that burden to some extent. So we're going to start with the absolute kind of cast iron essentials. Now, these are going to be really obvious, but I'm still going to list them just because this isn't aimed at experienced GMs, although hopefully in the kind of bonus items, there might be some things that you think, oh, that's cool. I've not thought of that. I might use it myself. So stay tuned. But this is the kind of the rock solid core that's going to help you kind of GM. And the first one is rule books. Ta-da! That's a gimme, isn't it? Make sure you at least have the relevant books you're going to need for that session. Pathfinder is obviously fairly rock solid in the form of the core rulebook has a huge amount of the stuff you will need as a GM and that your players may need to reference as a GM. If they have their own copies of the core rulebook, brilliant, it helps speed things up. They can look stuff up on the fly. But we're going to need the relevant books for our session. So the bestiary, if we're planning on using monsters during our session, make sure you jot down in your item number 2 notepad your encounters. It's going to have your prep in it. There's going to be a more detailed video on what kind of stuff is useful for kind of session notes and prep. It's its own video in a way. Well, it just is, isn't it? But you need a good notebook. You don't need to spend millions of pounds on a notebook. Don't go mad. A good A4 size notepad, that's ruled is enough for anything that you require, really. So don't go spending like £14 or £80 or something stupid on some fancy kind of gaming journal. You don't need it. A good A4 line pad, Bob's your uncle, a couple of quid from an office supply shop or even a supermarket, and you're laughing. It's all you need. You're going to want pens and pencils, because there's always going to be someone who wants to borrow a bit of paper or make some notes and maybe hasn't got a pen or a pencil themselves. So always have a little bit extra to help players out in case they haven't brought something they need, such as pens and pencils or paper. We're going to want dice, aren't we? That's pretty damn mission critical. Dice, again, is something where it doesn't hurt to have a few extra sets if you've got them. And once you start collecting dice, you'll want more dice. So a couple of sets, just in case someone again turns up to session and goes, oh, I left my dice, at home. Can I borrow some dice? And also for those situations where you're rolling multiple dice, because quite often you're in a situation where you might have to roll 4d6 for a spell, damage, and rolling 1d6 at a time is wasting time when you can just grab a handful because you've got several sets and go, right, handful of dice, boom. And it sounds scarier. Again, little DM tip. Roll dice, even if you don't need to, because occasionally it amps up the tension and makes kind of players kind of go, uh-oh, what's happening? When you kind of nod thoughtfully and go, yes, it's very interesting that you're considering this as an option. Just could have dunk. Carry on. It's a way of kind of adding a bit of tension and a bit of pressure, because they're thinking, oh, the DM's doing something behind the screen with his dice. Something's about to happen, or someone's up to something. We should be prepared for the unexpected. much like the GM himself, when they suddenly decide, well, I will shoot the shopkeeper because perhaps he's planning on sneak attacking me with a concealed blade that he may have drawn with that sleight of hand check you just rolled. And you'll go, oh, God, here we go. But anyway, that's by the by. We're going to want a GM screen for our game. I can't, again, emphasize, especially if you're a new GM, how important that screen is going to be. Not only does it give you the privacy kind of sphere that you need as a GM to hide your encounters, your notes, and your handouts that you don't necessarily want them to see, because, you know, if they sit down at the table and you're just sat in front of them and you've got a notepad in front of you, and at the start it says red dragon fight, X number of hit points, they're all going to go, what's that? Oh, red dragon fight. And then from the get-go, the game's up, they know what's coming, and there's an element of surprise and kind of mystique lost from your game. So again, the GM screen is important simply for the privacy element alone. It also enables you to conceal your roles, which is important, because in a subsequent video, there may be times where you have to fudge roles, or simply kind of blag roles to make your life easier as a GM, to aid in good storytelling. It's not cheating, it's good storytelling, and that's more important. Don't let the rules bind you. That again is I suppose, a more detailed topic that will come up in a later video. So if you're kind of concerned about that statement as a very new GM, don't worry about it. We're going to get to it. We're going to cover it. We're also going to want, in my case, a calculator. As I often joke, I'm terrible at maths. But again, if maths isn't a strong point, or it's simply a case of making sure it's as quick and accurate as possible, a calculator is really, really handy. Now, some of you, many of you might be saying, oh, but I've got a smartphone. The smartphone is what I class as a bonus item. And I'm going to kind of touch on that in just a moment. But having a separate calculator, so you're not having to flick back and forth on your phone, it's there, it's built for task, bop, 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 numbers done, that's what I need, thanks very much, notes in the notepad. So don't underestimate the power of the good old-fashioned calculator. So to recap, the rule books we're going to need. We might not always need lots of rule books, but we're going to need some combination thereof. So if you're running an adventure path, you're going to want the adventure path book, you're going to want your core rule book, and then if you're in perhaps a kind of a system where there is another reference book or some more advanced books that include information that you're going to want to use during a session, or you know your players might want to use during a session because perhaps one of them is playing a swashbuckler and they haven't got a copy of the Advanced Player's Guide, but you have, you're going to need it because they're going to need it and you're going to need to provide it for them, because there's nothing worse than being in a situation where something's very important and you've decided you're going to pause to take a moment to double check it and you can't double check it. Now, with a smartphone and internet access, that's not impossible because there's online SRDs, system reference documents as they used to be called in the old days. The Archives of Nethys is the Pathfinder 2e mainstay online reference tool, which has a lot of rules in it for you to be able to use on the fly. And that moves us nicely from our DM core toolbox of rulebooks, dice, notepad, pens, pencils, rubbers, pencil sharpeners. Think about stationery. Become a stationery nerd. It's important when you're a DM, because relying on players to do that, if they're in a rush and they're just not as focused as perhaps they should be, they might not all turn up with a pencil case. Do you know what I mean? Life is hectic enough, and getting a group of people together to play, be it online. I mean, if it's online, brilliant, because they're at home. So sometimes this doesn't apply, but just be over prepared. And then obviously GM screens for your reference material, because the GM screen is invaluable. It's full of great reference tools, on the fly kind of tables. It will have DC guides in it. It'll probably have condition guides in it. Often has action information built into it as well. So you've got this brilliant literal resource of rules and information slap in front of you with some great artwork on the other side to kind of emote the imaginations of the players, while you have good, juicy kind of backup references for the moment when you kind of go, duh, can't remember. Oh, there it is. Moving on. So that's the core. Now, bonus items. The first bonus items are smartphones, tablets, and laptops. It's really, really useful to have one or two of those, depending on how portable they are and how kind of much you can carry and how much is practical at the location you're going to be running a session in. For example, if you've not got a huge amount of space, a laptop can take up a lot of room, so a tablet might be better, but a smartphone is invaluable. What can you do with a smartphone? You can quick access rules on the fly with a bit of a Google search. You can perhaps pull up some screenshots that you've saved onto the tablet or your phone that you kind of used when you were thinking about a town or a character, and quickly show them some artwork on the screen and just kind of, show it around, or ping it in a group chat to the players. Don't be afraid to use technology, but don't think it's complicated, because if you have an important kind of couple of NPCs that are going to be hanging around and being involved with the party on the regular, it doesn't hurt to have some cool evocative artwork that you can just find with a Google search, save an image on your phone, and then with a simple setup of a group in WhatsApp or Messenger or whatever messenger app you like, just to go, okay, so this is Volgarth Drisniggle, and he is a goblin wizard who is advising you, and here's a picture of a cool goblin wizard. Happy days. Ping into the group it goes. So that's a kind of an example of how you can use it. Another very, very powerful and a great addition to any game session is an ambience, or music. If you go onto YouTube and you type in kind of cave ambience or battle ambience, you'll find all sorts of great sound effects for kind of just sat playing in the background to create a more evocative mood at your table. And again, it's not hard to do. The phrase that I'm going to start banging on about is the 6 Ps. Proper planning prevents piss poor performance. Happy times. And the joy of that phrase is, if you spend half an hour at home one day during the week in preparation for your gaming session, and you just go onto your YouTube and bang in a load of different ambiences for a tavern, tavern ambience, market or small town ambience, those kind of keywords for things that are going to be coming up in your session. Even if you literally just type in D&D gaming ambience or Pathfinder gaming ambience, or you've got musical tracks that are generally kind of considered good background music to just be left bubbling along nicely in the background if you don't want to dabble too deeply in very specific sounds, such as the sounds of a bustling town, or like a cart, wagon journey, or a ship creaking in a storm, which all these things you can find. Don't be afraid to use them. It's not difficult, especially if you've got 2 of those combinations, because you could literally have your smartphone with a playlist of ambiences that you want saved and just be going through them when you need them. And then if you've got your laptop or your tablet in front of you, you can be using that to quickly look up some rules with a Google search, or referencing an electronic copy of a rule book that you don't have a paper copy for. So don't be afraid to embrace technology. It's going to make your life easier, and it's going to give a little extra buzz to your game. Now, that's some good examples of how we can use electronic tools to not necessarily make our game radically easier, although the Googling quickfire kind of rules query or reminder, because you don't want to delve into a rule book and bog down and slow down too much during a game, is certainly very useful. And again, it's something that your players can do. So again, don't be afraid to say to a player, look, just quickly Google that just to make sure. If they're kind of going, oh, I can't quite remember what a rule is, don't be afraid to just say, well, if you've got your smartphone, just can you bang in a quick Google search for me? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the next person, and then we'll come back to you, and you can then, once you're happy with the rule in your own head, crack on with your turn as if nothing had happened. Great, brilliant, thanks very much. The action keeps moving, and you just move to the next person in the party of initiative order and bounce back to them as soon as they go, right, I've got it. Happy days. So that's a really good use of smartphones, laptops, tablets. If you really want to get into ambience and music and all that kind of stuff, go as wild as you want. Michael Gelfi, Sword Coast Sounds, they're good YouTube kind of ambience and music kind of creators for that kind of content. Think about movies. Think about so Lord of the Rings, Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia, for music, and again games like Oblivion and Skyrim. You can find their ambience music online, and for other games as well, like The Witcher. So you can really go wild with that stuff and easily access it via YouTube, as long as you're prepared to tolerate some ads from time to time that might be disruptive. So just check the ones that you're going to use to make sure they're not completely rammed with adverts, because that can really break immersion. If you really want to get technical, there's a brilliant product called SYRINSCAPE, which is jam-packed and is a soundboard for gaming, where you can have all sorts of presets for different kinds of battles, where you've got like drag kind of sound effect volumes that you can kind of move up and down. So SYRINSCAPE, now you have to pay to use it, so I'm not going to say newbie GMs out there go and spend money on gaming products. I'm going to say, if you're an experienced GM and you haven't heard of SYRINSCAPE, go and check it out. If you're a new GM, have a nose, but don't get too invested. Dabble and practice and get a feel for it with things like YouTube before you start spending money, before you necessarily need to. And then other very simple, easy bonus items for our extra kind of bit of prep before we run a session. An NPC name list. Now that sounds odd, because it's like, well, surely you've got lots of NPCs written down in all your notes. You're going to have maybe a smattering of named NPCs in your session notes that you've got in your trusty notepad. Perhaps in the previous session they said they wanted to go and speak to a wizard, and so you can quickly jot down a couple of wizard names and a couple of bits of detail about a couple of wizards they might meet in your notes for the next session. But there's going to be what we call throwaway NPCs that you can't plan for, and that's like they walk into a random pub and talk to the publican, or they suddenly start up a conversation with someone they pass in the street because they've suddenly decided they need to get directions to something like an armourer's or a cafe for lunch. There's all sorts of random people that your players will suddenly think, oh, I'd quite like to talk to such and such, or I'm going to suddenly strike up a conversation with the shopkeeper or the blacksmith. And you can't, in your session notes, write them all down and have them all done. You just can't. There's too many possibilities. What you want to try and do is focus on ones that are going to be in there for plot purposes. So you don't need 100 million names, but if you know that they're in an area where there are elves and there are dwarves and there are gnomes as well as humans, just go onto Google, or other search providers are available, and bung in fantasy, name generators, elven name generators, dwarven name generators. There's lots and lots of web resources out there for that kind of stuff. And then just literally create a Word document, copy maybe 10 of each onto a Word document, make sure there's plenty of space, around them, so they're not really crammed in, so you can just quickly and easily look at them and read them. Decent sized font. You don't want to be like, I think that's a name. You want to just be able to go, Broderick Ironhammer, the dwarf blacksmith, looks at you with a interested stroke of his beard and says, "Have you come to spend coin in my blacksmiths?" And instantly the party have got a bit of a vibe that there's something more about your world. It gives it a bit more of a vibe. So that's a really helpful tool. And also, because you've left plenty of space on your NPC name list, you've basically got the ability to kind of go, all right, Broderick Ironhammer, right? That was the name I just used. Blacksmith in Colville, the name of the town. And then if they go back to a location and they decide to randomly pop back in and see what would probably normally be a throwaway NPC, you're not left going, oh, I think his name was Stephen Ironbeard, and the party members who are insidiously annoying and take better notes than you do as the GM will go, actually, I think you'll find his name was Broderick Ironhammer, and lord it over you considerably for quite a long time. So that, again, as a bonus tool, it's not mission critical. It's not going to make you a better GM, but it's going to help you improvise, which is a really, really important skill that you're going to have to grow and develop and get used to. No one can suddenly teach you the art of improvisation. But again, there are some tips and tricks that are going to come up in a later video that are going to help kind of give you a way of starting to get better at improvisation. So stay tuned for that one. Maps and handouts. Again, these can be very, very simple and straightforward. And you don't have to use them at all if you don't want to. They're not, again, mission critical. They're like miniatures and kind of, whiteboards and map tools. All these things that can add to a game, but can also complicate and clutter it. You're going to have to find what works for you. But maps and handouts and those kind of things, they definitely can help, especially for perhaps towns and cities, because it gives the character something to kind of fire their imagination. Now, where can we find these? Lots of tools and resources, again, online. A good old Google image search, D&D maps, Pathfinder maps, fantasy gaming maps, castle maps. You can literally just start firing in key terms into Google search engines on the images section, and you'll start pulling up. You can pull up character artwork. You can pull up dungeon maps. You can pull up, maps and of towns and villages. And if you want to, you can print those off and have a little key written down in your notepad and pop it on the table and say, so you arrive in the village of Freeport, and then pop the map down in front of the party and say, you arrive here at the western entrance, and point to it. And say, as you walk in through the gates, through the stone wall, the guards nod to you and just give you a suspicious glance. But they don't see anything untoward, and so they seem happy for you to enter. And then you could have, obviously, be referencing the map, and because you can see that there's a tavern and there's a temple, you can simply say to them, you see on your left the Buxom Moon Tavern, and at the end of the street, visible looming over the surrounding houses, you can see the Temple of Abadar, resplendent with its kind of gold and its wealth as traders bustle in and out to pay their respects to the Lord of Trade and mercantileness. Bam! It helps you out, doesn't it, as a GM? And it also gives the players that extra level of oomph for their own imagination. So again, they're not absolutely critical. Do you need it to run a good session? No. Does it help? Does it make it a bit easier? Yes. Then we've got index cards. Ooh. Now, index cards, some of you may not kind of know what they are, but they're basically, we used to put them in things like File of Axis. Good little cards like this. They're lined. They're not particularly big. Do you know what I mean? That kind of a size. And you can jot all sorts of useful things down on index cards. So again, proper planning, preventing piss poor performance. If you know that in the session coming up, they're going to find a treasure haul. They're going to go into, they're already in a dungeon, let's say, and they're about to enter a room where if they, survive an encounter, that there's a chest with some loot in. You can literally, instead of writing the loot down in your notes for the gaming session, and then having to tell them all and then write stuff down, which obviously bogs down a session. Instead, you can just get an index card and go, treasure chest in the abandoned caves outside, Grumville, whatever it may be, to reference it for you and also for the players, and then be like, so there's 500 silver pieces and there's 40 gold pieces and there's a masterwork longsword, and there's a couple of suits of kind of tattered but still quite good condition, fine clothes, and there's a Ming vase, whatever it may be that you've decided to pop in your treasure chest that is the reward for this particular part of the adventure. And then when the moment comes and you say, oh, there's this chest in the corner of the room, that you see over the dead body of the bugbear that was guarding it, and the party go, oh, treasure. You can go, yes. And then you can simply kind of read it out and then pass it over, and they go, all right, brilliant. And then one of them can file it away, one of them who's reliable and won't lose it, and other people can go, all right, well, we're going to split the money up, and they can pop some notes on it, and then they can transfer it onto their character sheets as you're carrying on without you having to keep telling them what was in the treasure hold. Makes your life a lot easier, doesn't it? Does it make you a better GM? Slightly. Does it make your life easier? Yes. You can also use index cards for such things as baddies. So say we're going to use that bugbear again. So, Grumblemore, the bugbear, we've looked at his stats in the monsters manual, and we're going to jot down his perception, his armor class, his hit points, his trained skill, so to speak. So what his trained skills are as a number, and next to that, we'll write a few of the key ones down, because in most encounters, especially combat encounters, you're not necessarily going to need to know their performance check if they're a bugbear fighter, are you? No. It's very unlikely that he's suddenly going to be challenged to a breakdancing duel by your bard and suddenly have to roll a check on his performance skill. Beware, that may happen. Again, expect the unexpected. But having a note of what his trained DCs are means that you, instead of having to go, oh, let me have a look in the core rulebook, you can just go, is he trained in performance? No, so I'll just take that number and I'll take 4 off of it. Or I'll just say it's +2. But if it sounds like a skill he would have, you can go, oh, that's probably +7, because most of his trained skills seem to be +7. So I'm just going to roll a dice and add +7 and go, he's either done it or he's not done it. Great. Makes your life easier, doesn't it? And really, for the purposes of combat, having their attack written down, so he's got a, say, +11 with his longbow that does, D8, damage, and then he's got for close combat, he's got a bastard sword, which is +11 to hit and does a D12, +4. That's it, isn't it? And rather than having to quickly kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, I'm just going to get the beastry out and quickly flick through into that page and then start rolling dice and have this big complicated thing to look at where maybe I'm only using 20% of it, I can go, all right, well, I've got my core stuff here on this little index card, and it's in my notepad where I'm going to get to that encounter, so I can just go, bump, that's the encounter I'm going to run, that's my NPC villain that I'm going to be using this particular session. Again, if they're a spellcaster, not all of their spells they have in the monsters manuals are combat spells. There's going to be spells when you read these monster manual entries where you kind of go, never going to use that, that's irrelevant, that's pointless, that's not going to be relevant to me. Something may come up that you may need it, but it probably won't. But if it does, we can simply have a note of the page number on that particular index card, so we can just go straight to the page we need. But for the most part, we can have our mission critical key bits of information on our index card. Now again, is that making you a better GM? Yes, because it's helping you manage and speed up your flow of narrative and blending that into combat. So don't underestimate the power of a good couple of index cards with some critical kind of information on, be that, like I said, treasure, or a bit of pre-written text. Another good use of an index card, just logged away out of the way, where you can have maybe written a description about a particularly, amazing kind of point of interest that they're going to encounter. Maybe they've come to this town to visit the Temple of Abadar specifically, because one of them is a champion of Abadar, and he's heard that it's a very beautiful and wonderful place, and he would like to come and, pay his respects and throw him a couple of gold pieces and pray there, so he can say that he's spiritually, had this little moment in his life. And you've been like, cool, okay. That's coming up in the session because he's made a lot of noise in the last session about being like, oh, can't wait to get there and see that place. So rather than just be like, oh yeah, it's the Temple of Abadar, mate. Yeah, it's great. You love it. You go and you pray. Get a bit arty and write 3 or 4 lines or of text. The walls glisten with gold and opulence. Huge arches, peak up into the high kind of loft spaces where the echoing chants of beautiful harmonic choir music praise Abadar in a 24-hour constant kind of vigil, whilst around the altar constant clinking and kind of clanking of scales being balanced, and trades and transactions bustle around in a 24-hour kind of amalgamation of business and prayer to the great Lord of Trade Abadar. Now, obviously, I just kind of fudged that on the fly, but you can see how you could take something like that and, one afternoon or one evening in the build-up to that session, refine that and get a real kind of good, narrative piece written that's, like I said, only 3 or 4 lines, so you can sound amazing when you just grab it and go, yes, as you approach the Temple of Abadar, the walls glisten with opulence of gold, and just spiel it out. And they'll be like, wow, that sounds really cool. It was worth coming here. And has that index card made your life easier? Has it made you a better DM? Quite possibly so. So, on that bombshell, that about brings me to time. Hopefully this DM toolbox video has been useful. Hopefully there's stuff that's inspired you to kind of look at your own kind of GM kit list and thought, oh, I might add that. Or that sounds like a terrible idea and I will never do that in my entire life. Or it's made you kind of think, well, actually, I do this and that really helps me as a GM. Either way, drop me a comment, drop me a like, drop me a subscription. I'd love to hear about your GM tips because, like I said, this is my, I suppose, kind of core quick fire kind of amalgam of my experience and my kind of time as a GM and what I found has really benefited me. So don't panic about what the bloody hell do I use a notepad for, or how do I do my notes and all that kind of good stuff. We're going to get to that because session prep is its own video, and rightly so. It's just deserving of such time. So I will love you and leave you, and I will see you on the next video. Like I said, if you've got great tips that really help you as a games master, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear them. We can share them with our community. I may, if I see a lot of great comments, revisit and do a kind of a shout out of my kind of favorites from that, because I think that's definitely worthwhile. The more we can share our community, our cumulative experience, the better we can all grow. And that's what this channel's about. It's about growing in a hobby. And it's a bloody good hobby, isn't it? Let's be honest. So with that, I'm going to say peace out, and I will see you on the next video, which hopefully I'll be doing tomorrow. Woohoo! See you soon. Bye.